Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at a figure who really needs no introduction, but whose journey is just so profoundly complex, it absolutely demands a closer look. I'm talking about Nelson Mandela. When you actually watch his life unfold, going from a royal-born student to an armed revolutionary, a political prisoner, and then, ultimately, a president, it really puts the staggering scale of his achievements into perspective. Let's see how this all happened. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap to understanding his lifelong pursuit of healing a divided nation. We'll start with his early life and education, move into the anti-apartheid struggle, look at his 27 years in prison, explore his freedom and presidency, and wrap up with his enduring legacy of reconciliation. Section 1. Early life and education, from Mvezo to law school. Our timeline kicks off on July 18, 1918, when he was born Rolihlahla Mandela into the Thembu royal family in Mvezo, South Africa. Now, you might be wondering, where exactly did the name Nelson come from, right? Since it obviously wasn't his birth name. Well, on his very first day at a local mission school, a teacher just gave him this English name. It was actually standard practice at the time, which is a pretty stark reflection of the colonial norms that were deeply embedded in South Africa's education system back then. His education was a steady, determined ascent. He started out at the University of Fort Hare, eventually moved over to the University of the Witwatersrand to study law, and ultimately became one of South Africa's very first Black lawyers. And this wasn't just some career milestone. This legal foundation was absolutely crucial. It gave him the exact framework he needed to logically and legally challenge the state's deep systemic injustices. Section 2. The anti-apartheid struggle, fighting the system. Armed with that new legal expertise, Mandela dove headfirst into political activism. He joined the African National Congress, the ANC, in 1944, and actually helped form its youth league. So the crucial point here is defining the exact magnitude of what he was up against. Apartheid wasn't just societal prejudice, it was a brutal government-enforced policy of strict racial segregation and discrimination. Mandela literally dedicated his entire life to dismantling this monumental systemic law of the land. Now, his initial strategy was firmly rooted in peaceful protest. But after years and years of nonviolent demonstrations being repeatedly crushed by severe government violence, well, the approach had to pivot. The strategy shifted to armed struggle. And Mandela actually co-founded the military wing of the ANC. They called this military wing Umkhonto we Sizwe, which powerfully translates to Spear of the Nation. This militant phase was a direct, undeniable reaction to the government's ruthless crackdowns on activists, who, up until then, had only ever asked for peace. Section 3. 27 years in prison, the Rivonia Trial and Robben Island. In 1964, during the infamous Rivonia Trial, everything changed when he was sentenced to life imprisonment for sabotage and conspiracy against the state. 27. Let that number really sink in for a second. He spent 27 years in prison. The vast majority of this time was spent confined on Robben Island. But rather than silencing him, this massive duration behind bars actually transformed him into the world's most famous political prisoner. He became a global, undeniable symbol of resistance against apartheid. Eventually, though, the tide began to turn. On the 11th of February, 1990, he finally walked free. But this highly anticipated release didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was the direct result of unrelenting domestic and international pressure. The whole world was watching, and the system finally cracked. Section 4. Freedom and the Presidency, from prisoner to president. Let's see how this builds into literally one of the most remarkable political transitions in modern history. The timeline of his rise is just staggering. 1990 marks his release from prison. Just 3 years later, in 1993, he's awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And then, the very next year, in 1994, he leads the ANC to a massive victory in South Africa's first fully representative democratic election. Talk about a whirlwind. I want to pause briefly on that 1993 milestone. The Nobel Peace Prize was actually awarded jointly to Nelson Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk. This was a massive recognition of their collaborative work in peacefully ending the apartheid system. It really proved that even the most bitter of divides could be bridged through diplomacy and a shared resolve. Section 5. A Legacy of Reconciliation, Healing a Nation. During his presidency from 1994 to 1999, he faced a monumental choice: seek vengeance or focus on healing deep racial divisions. He chose reconciliation. This shift is perfectly captured in his title. Earlier, we discussed the militant phrase, spear of the nation, right? But as president, he became known universally as the father of the nation. It's a beautiful new moniker that reflects his evolution from a revolutionary fighter into a globally recognized statesman totally dedicated to peace. And this brilliantly illustrates his monumental legacy. Beyond his historic presidency and that Nobel Prize, his true masterpiece was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This was a radical, incredibly innovative mechanism that allowed both victims and perpetrators to bring the truth to light, which paved the way for real, tangible national healing. To connect this powerful history directly to all of us today, Nelson Mandela International Day is observed globally every single year on his birthday, the 18th of July. It's a day specifically designed to keep his incredible spirit of service alive. Which brings us to another highly significant number, 67. Reflecting back on his 27 years in prison, this new number represents his 67 total years of dedicated activism. To honor those years, people all across the globe are encouraged to dedicate 67 minutes of their own time to community service on his birthday. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. How will you spend your 67 minutes of community service to honor a lifetime of activism and reconciliation? It's a powerful reminder that the work of justice didn't just end with him. It's something we all have to carry forward. Thanks for exploring this with me, and keep learning.